I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. Our feet shall be standing within thy gates, O Lord, thy Jerusalem. Amen. Amen, amen. I welcome you to True Spirit. It is now 11 o'clock. We welcome you to our 11 o'clock service. It is third Sunday, our senior service. Amen. Amen. I'll be glad when I can stand among the seniors. Amen. That's a beautiful place to be. Some of us don't make it. Being real, some of us don't make it. We have three lovely seniors that's going to handle our devotion on this morning. We're going to have scripture by Sister Patterson. We're going to have our prayer by Sister Mary Bryant. And we'll have our song by none other than our Deacon Emeritus, Deacon Munn.
Good morning. Good morning. Will you turn to Psalms 19, starting at verse 7, and I will read the scripture in your hearing. The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is thy servant warned, and in keeping of them there is great reward. Who can understand his errors? Cleanse thou me from secret faults. Keep back thy servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me. Then shall I be upright, and I shall be innocent from the great transgression. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. May God add a blessing to the reading, hearing, and doing of his holy word.
You may be seated. Let us bow for prayer, please. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Dear Heavenly Father, most precious, all-wise God, we come to you this morning, oh God, just recognizing who you are, that you are our creator, our maker, our sustainer, and our Father, and we thank you, Lord. God, we ask, oh God, that you would have mercy upon us. Forgive us for our sins, oh God, for we know we have sinned and come short of your glory. But we thank you, God, that you are ever forgiving and always loving us, and we thank you for that, Lord. We thank you, oh God, for all the many blessings you bestowed upon us. We thank you, God, for this second in time right now that you've never promised to us, but that you've given to us. And we thank you, Father. God, we thank you for all who assembled here today, who've come to hear your word and to give you praise and worship in this place, oh Father. For we have come to this place, oh God, to give you the glory, the honor, and the worship. And oh Father, we thank you for letting us come here. Dear Lord, we ask your blessings upon this service today. We ask that you would bless the person who's going to bring your word to us, God, and give us listening ears and open hearts to hear what you have to say. And Father God, we just thank you for all the love and the kindness that you give us. We give you the glory, the honor, and all praise. In the name of Jesus, we thank you and we love you, Lord. Amen.
We're going to ask everybody to help us sing this little song. You just might love it. Woke up this morning with my mind. Hey, Jesus. Woke up this morning with my mind. I know it was there. Oh, Jesus. Yes, I woke up this morning with my mind. Hey, Jesus.
Amen. Amen. We thank our seniors. Amen. Amen. I now turn you to the hands of our pulpit.
Good morning, True Spirit. If you would please stand with me for the reading of responsive reading. The responsive reading is titled Being in Unity with the Savior. It's lifted from Ephesians, the 4th chapter, verses 1 through 6. I will be the leader, and you will be the congregation. At the end, we all will read together. I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called. Endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace.
There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called in one hope of your calling.
One Lord, one faith, one baptism. All, one God, and Father of all, who is above all, and through all, and in you all. Amen. You may be seated.
call him whenever I need him. Our Father up in heaven. I can go out to God in prayer. I can go out to God. Oh, he can work it out. I know he'll work it out. He can. I don't have no doubt. I know he'll work it out. He can. Oh, yes, he can. I tried him for myself. I know he'll work it out. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't have no doubt. I don't have no doubt. Oh, yes, he can. Oh, yes. I know for myself. I know he can work it out. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I fall on my knees. Lord, help me please. Yeah. Oh, yes, he can. Yes. Oh, yes. Hey, I know he can. I know he'll work it out. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I don't have no doubt. 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 He did it for me this morning. I don't have no doubt. I don't have no doubt. I don't have no doubt. He can work it out. He can work it out. He can work it out. Oh Lord, he can work it out. I know he'll work it out. He can. Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh, I can call it whenever I need it. Our Father up in heaven. I can go to God in prayer. I can go. Oh, I know. Hey, 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 yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I don't have no doubt. I know he'll work it out. He can. Oh yes. 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 Tried it for myself. I know he'll bring me through. He can. Oh yes. Yes. Hey, I don't have no doubt. I don't have no doubt. He can. Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yes. As I walk along, I know my God can. Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yes. In the midnight hour, morning, noon, he can. Oh yes. Oh yes. I have no doubt. I know he'll work it out. Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yes. I can call him when I need him. Our Father up in heaven. I can go to God in prayer. I can go to God in prayer. Oh yeah.
How many of you can go to God in prayer? How many can you go to God in prayer today? Do you know him today? Do you need him today? Isn't he an awesome and wonderful God? Isn't he awesome? Woo! Y'all should be getting some soul stirring in here today. Because God is in the house. Amen. Don't miss the shifter. Don't miss the shifter today. Hallelujah.
Yeah. I don't have no doubt. I know he'll work it out. He can. Oh yes. Yes. I don't have no doubt. I know he'll work it out, he can. I don't have no doubt. I know he'll work it out, he can. Oh yeah, oh yeah. I tried it for myself. I know he'll bring you through, he can. Oh yes, oh yes, yes. I have no doubt. I know he'll work it out, yeah. Oh yeah. I don't have no doubt. I know he'll work it out, he can. Oh, I can call him whenever I need him. Said my Father up in heaven. I can go to God and pray. I can go to God and pray.
What is the highest praise? Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Thank you for the shifter. Hallelujah. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. You are mighty God. Hallelujah. Woo. It is altar time. You want to bring your burdens to the altar. You can come on up. If you came in heavy, you can go out light. Y'all better come on up to the altar. Amen. God is good. So good. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Jesus. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for being in the house, God. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus.
Maybe she's trying.
Thank you, Jesus.
Yeah.
Yes, Lord. Yay. Hey.
Yes.
As Pastor would say, woo. Yay. God is in the house. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, Lord. May we bow our heads in prayer. Oh, wonderful God. Wonderful God that you are. Precious God. Sovereign God. A delivering God. A healing God. A providing God. Thank you, God, for just being in the midst today. You're such an awesome God. And you're so worthy to be praised. Now, Lord, I ask that you touch us. Touch each and every one of us standing here today, God. Whatever need that we need, Lord, you are the provider. You are the sustainer. You are so awesome. And Lord, we can't do anything without you. Thank you, God. Thank you for touching us today. Thank you for touching our children today. Thank you for going out into the hospitals today. Thank you for touching today, God. Thank you for touching those who have lost loved ones today. Comfort us like only you can comfort us, God. We need you, Lord. We can't make it without you, God. And we love you, Lord. Lord, now I ask that you touch Pastor Greer today, Heavenly Father. Let him bring a rhema word today. Touch Reverend Hammond today, Lord. Allow him to bring a rhema word today as well. Open our hearts, Heavenly Father. Open our ears today so we can hear a word from you, God. Decrease him, Lord, and you increase in him today so that we can see your image upon him. Lord, we love you. We love you. We love you, God. We love you, Lord. Now, Lord, we thank you for blessing us. You didn't have to do it, God, but you do. You said that if we give you praise and honor today, Lord, you will grant us what we will. Lord, thank you for that. You said if we draw nigh unto you, you would draw nigh unto us. Thank you, God, for that. Because you don't have to, but you do. Thank you for allowing us to have a relationship with you, God. It's so important to have a relationship with you, God. You don't have to allow it, but you do. We don't take that for granted. And we thank you, God. Touch those children or college students, Lord, that's going back to school today. Touch them, God. We ask that you cover them, God, today. And if anything come up against them, not of like you, God, we ask that you make Satan flee. Make him flee, God. You said that we have the power to make him flee. Now, Satan, you have to move. Thank you, God. Thank you for True Spirit. Thank you for all the members, all of us members. Thank you, God. Thank you, Lord. Now touch every church that is open in your name. Touch, God. We love you. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. And your son, Jesus, who died so that we can have the rights to the tree of life. Thank you, Lord God. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen.
It's now that time in service where we continue our worship through our giving. Through our giving. Trying to stay on course here, but Lord have mercy. Through our giving. Ushers and deacons, if you'll come. worship through giving. Lord God, we ask that you bless that we have, that, Lord, you see it as a great sacrifice and that you use it to further your kingdom. In your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Good morning, True Spirit. Good morning. This is a great day to be in the house of the Lord. We have the opportunity now to acknowledge our guests and welcome our guests. If you are visiting with us today, if you can please stand. Tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe who brought you. We would love to acknowledge you in this moment. Any guests? Any visitors? Amen, amen, amen. We also have our welcome committee that will come and give you a gift, so please remain standing after you introduce yourself. Good morning.
Greet you all. My name is Andre Richards. I just moved to the area, and this is my family here. So happy to be here.
Welcome. Amen. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. You want to say something? Perfect. Well, we do have a saying here. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm Pearlie Armstrong, and I used to belong to this church about 40 years ago. And I still have family here, like my son-in-law, Charles. But I praise God to be back here.
Amen.
She used to be my neighbor. And I'm thankful. I really am. God's good. Amen. He's good. He brought me all the way from everything. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. Amen, amen.
Miss Pearlie, tell Dina I said hey. We do have a saying here at True Spirit. God loves you. We love you. And ain't nothing you can do about it. Please turn your attention to the monitors behind me for our announcements.
To be alive on July 21st. My name's Chris. Good morning, True Spirit. Today is a beautiful day to be alive on July 21st. My name's Christiana, and let's get started on this week's announcements. Can I just say that it is hot out here lately? When it gets hot like this, I know some of us like to go on vacation. You do not have to worry about that though. You can still catch up on live and previous services by searching and subscribing to the channel TSBC Media on YouTube. Are you a new member to True Spirit? Well, we have just a class for you. It occurs every Sunday in the fellowship hall, starting at 9:30 a.m. For those of you that want to brush up on the Word of God and dive deeper, we also have our Sunday school classes, which occurs at the same time. Now, I know something big is coming up, but I cannot quite put my finger on it. Oh, wait, it's our 25th church anniversary. If you are still sitting there watching me instead of praising God, I don't know what can get you excited. The anniversary this year is starting on Friday, August 9th with a musical. Then on August 10th is our annual church picnic. I heard a little bit was going to be on the menu. I would not miss that day for nothing. Finally, on Sunday, we would have our 8 a.m., 11 a.m., and 3:30 p.m. worship services. The theme this year is Standing Together on This Rock with a Unified Vision, coming from 2 Samuel chapter 22, verse 2 and 3. And the colors are gold, silver, and blue. Again, let's get excited, because 25 years for any church is no small accomplishment. We are looking forward to 25 more. That does it for our upcoming events. Keep up with what's going on with us by searching and liking us on Facebook at True Spirit Baptist Church. Now, here are the rest of your weekly announcements. And remember, God loves you, I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it, even if you tried. Have a blessed week.
Stepped in on time. Pockets low, I didn't have a dime, and all I did was me, and I got something to praise him for. Let me see you put your hands together and praise him, yeah, yeah, and praise him, yeah.
Amen. Give us some praise. Amen. God is just so good. He's so good. Give him a big round of praise. Did he wake you up this morning? Did he start you on your way? Is he keeping you in your right mind? Give God some praise. Amen. 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 This is the period of observation. I just got a couple observations. Scholarship Committee and Angel Tree take pictures today. If you can stay behind for about 10 minutes, so we can do that. I also call in Deacon Horton up for a church announcement.
Just real quickly, Christiana did a wonderful job in announcing our church anniversary. I just want to let you all know. Good job. Amen. Amen. I just want to let the family know that we also have a journal, souvenir journal. And we want everyone's picture in that journal. We want everyone to take out an ad in that journal. This is our church. Amen? So let's support our church. There's in the vestibule, there's information in the vestibule. We also have the T-shirts. And we just want everyone to be a part of this, all right? Even if you're not a member, you can still take out an ad in the journal. Amen? If you know a business that you support, have them support you in your church and have them take an ad out in our journal. Amen? May God bless you and keep you.
It's so amazing. It's so amazing. Your love for me. Your love for me. It's so amazing. It's so amazing. Your sacrifice for me. For every blessing. For every blessing. Give unto me. Give unto me. For every valley. You used to strengthen me. I don't deserve your love, your tender mercy. If not for your grace, where would I be? It's so amazing. Your grace, where would I
You thought I was to die for. So you sacrificed your life so I can be free, so I can be whole, so I can tell everyone I know. You thought I was worth saving. So you came and changed my life. You thought I was worth keeping. Thank you, Jesus. So you sacrificed. You thought I was worth. So you came. And changed my life. You thought I was worth keeping. Thank you, Jesus. So you cleaned me up inside. You thought I was to die for. So you sacrificed. I'll worship you, I'll give you glory, I'll give you praise. So I can tell everyone I know. I'll worship you, I'll give you glory, I'll give you praise. You thought I was worth saving, so you came and changed my life. You thought I was worth keeping, so you cleaned me up inside. You thought I was to die for. So you sacrificed your life so I can be free, I can be whole, I can tell everyone I know. So you came. So you clean me up inside. You thought I was thank you, Jesus. I'll worship you, I'll give you glory. You thought I was worth saving, so you came and changed my life. You thought I was worth keeping, so you cleaned me up inside. You thought I was to die for. You thought I was to die for.
you thought I was to die for. So you sacrificed your life so I can be free, I can be whole, I can tell everyone I know. You thought I was worth saving.
Let the church say amen. Let the church say amen. Hallelujah. It's the highest praise. Think about it. He didn't have to do it, but he did. God is good. All the time. I don't even know how you can even be still through that. Sometimes on life's journey, we forget what the Word of God says. You can't do anything without Him. I think that we have been distracted by the things of this world. That every time we wake up, we should give God thanks and praise. Some people don't wake up. Some people can't dress themselves. And we set on God. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. He came into my life. He's changed me in the inside. Hallelujah. God is good all the time. Before I knew Him, it wasn't no hope. But I thank Him for all things. I take nothing for granted. I recently went home for a family reunion. Back to a place when a shout was heard around the world. That's Memphis, Tennessee. There, they have a civil rights museum there. It brings you back to and remind you the struggle that took place. The things that we take for granted now, somebody died for it. I'm going to get there. I don't know your story. Don't know what you've been through. But I have a song can't nobody sing but me. The person that you see now in this suit now ain't always had a suit. All right. Come on. The song Patches wasn't just a song. I said hallelujah. Psalms. That's where I'm coming from. It'll be the 34th chapter, 1 through 8. Are we ready? Let me ask you a question. Are you praying for me? Do you want to hear from God? Keep on praying. We're in the latter days. It's getting dark.
The word of God say, this is David giving God thanks. I will bless the Lord. Somebody know, right? At all times. His praises shall continually be in my mouth. My soul shall make her boast in the Lord. The humble shall hear thereof and be glad. Oh, this is something we can do. Oh, magnify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. Oh, Lord. I sought the Lord, and he heard me. Oh, Lord. And he delivered me from all of my fears. All of them. They looked unto him, and he was lighting, and their face was not ashamed. The poor man cried, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all of his troubles. Those that don't know him get to know him. The angel of the Lord encamped round about them that fear him and delivered them. Come on, church. Come on, church. If you don't know him, listen to this. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. You don't have to take my word. Taste them for yourself. Blessed is the man that trusts in him. Father God, we thank you. We give you praise, glory, and honor. Realizing that it's nothing we can do without you. If it hadn't been for Jesus, let every saint that called up on you ask themselves this question: where would they be? Lord, we are called to worship you, realizing there's nothing we can do without you. Lord, we come to give you praise and lift you up, realizing you had already spoken to us. It's a time to get our house in order. You have spoken to us and you have told us we must work to work while it's day, because truly night will come where no man can work. Let me decrease, dear Lord, that you increase. That the people don't look up on me, but they'll listen to your voice. That you'll speak to their heart. That we'll come before holy God and repent. That the power of the Holy Ghost will move wherever we go. That those dry cups will be filled. That when you come back, dear Lord, we'll be that church without a spot or a wrinkle. This is my request, and this is my prayer in your son Jesus' name. And let the church say amen. Amen. David, giving thanks. Everybody familiar with David? This is the David that slew Goliath. All right, that's the one. At that time, Saul was a king, right? But through his disobedience, I think Samuel went down to Jesse's house and found the anointed one that wasn't in the house, was out of the house, taking care of sheep, right? David knew how to take care of sheep. I think that's what pastors do, don't they? Take care of sheep. This David here is the one that cut off Goliath's head. Saul got jealous. I'm just talking about David's dancing and the song goes out. Saul only killed about 1,000, right? David me 10,000. What happens when you feel as though you deserve something and you're not being obedient to God, God anoints somebody else, we step around and get mad. So Saul is searching out trying to kill David. See, when you're obedient to God, you don't have to search out and kill anybody. What's belong to you is you. Belongs to you. Am I right? I'm talking about, but Saul was a mighty man. It said there was nowhere in Israel that David could hide. I'm talking about David that slew Goliath, right? So he was running from Saul, and the closest place that he could get to was in the camp of the Philistines. That's crazy. Yeah. I'm talking about somebody know what you done did, whether or not you know it or not. Will point you out. And the foolish thing about what David did trying to escape, you got to be in a desperate mood to go to the enemy camp. When he got there, David was playing like he was crazy. Let me help somebody. Let me make it very simple. It's like somebody broke in your house, stole your watch, and the next day knock at your door and said, do you want to buy this watch? That's crazy, ain't it? But he will let go. So you see David now, he's giving thanks to God for deliverance. You know, I had mentioned a little bit earlier that I went back home. And I thank God for deliverance. Because truly, to go from the pit to the palace, it's been a journey. In the name of Jesus. See, when you know you're not worthy, I know we think we are worthy of everything. That's why we can't give God thanks. Because you think everything you got, you earn. I got a bachelor's degree, but if you woke up out of your mind, what good would it? You forget. You want to walk down memory lane with me? You got on your spiritual tennis shoes. I'm walking through the Civil Rights Museum. And I'm looking at a burning bus that they got in there. Freedom Riders, you know, that bus got burnt, you know, for equal rights. I turn another corner. They hit a diner set up. Those that like to go to Golden Corral and all those places, you weren't allowed to go in those restaurants. You were served in the back. As I turn another corner, I'm looking at this slave ship. And this ship here, they call it a shark boat, and I'm going to tell you why in a minute. It was these slaves that was crouched down like this here. Now you're talking from Africa to the United States like this. Millions of us of color died on that trip. You know why they call it a shark boat? Because they were throwing them off in the ocean or whatever, and you know sharks like blood, and they followed that ship. Are you with me? I just want to bring it back to you because we don't want to give God thanks and praise. As I walk a little bit further, and I'm going to read this to you. I can really say it in my heart, but I'm going to read it because I don't want to make a mistake. I heard his voice. I was about a teenager at that time. I mentioned about a shot that was heard around the world. It was April 3rd, 1968. Yes, I am that old. Martin Luther King had made it from Atlanta to Tennessee. before he got to Atlanta, they was checking the packages, going through it, whatever, and say, hey, the plane was on a delay, right? About time he got to Memphis, he was tired. He was begging to go down to Mason Temple. That's where he gave the mountaintop speech. This is what he said. And it's still, as I turned that corner, you could hear his voice. And he was speaking. It was a Raymond word in my heart because some things I just had forgotten. Some things I just didn't even want to remember. But I heard his voice saying this: I don't know what will happen to me now. We got some difficult days ahead. But he said, it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. And I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a longevity. Longevity have its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I looked over and I seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And so I'm happy tonight. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm happy today. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. I can tell you this. That was Martin speaking. But now Reverend Hammond speaking. I've been called to preach God's word. And I have got to a place it really doesn't matter to me no more. When I look over my life, the struggles, the things that we today take for granted, the disrespect we have for elders that fought a battle, no respect at all. But yet God brought us through. If you looked at the topic of my sermon, he didn't have to. But he did. Everything that you got, everything you think you earn, I want you to ask yourself your question. You don't have to look at your neighbor, look at yourself. He didn't have to do it. But he did. When you laid up in that hospital and the doctor shook his head and said it wasn't no hope, but now you're here today. And by his stripes you are healed. Let me tell you today, he didn't have to, but he did. That child that you raised up that don't act like your child anymore. You done did all you can do, but yet you look at God's word, he will give you that peace that passes all understanding. He didn't have to, but he did. Yeah, when you get in the middle of the road and don't know which way to go, and you forget about the Lord will fight your battles if you only be still, and you find yourself in a weary place, the Lord will send you his comforter. He didn't have to do it, but he did. We are called to worship him, to give him praise and thanks. He is Jehovah Jireh, Emmanuel, Jehovah Nissi, Yahweh, the Lamb of God. He's everything that we need, the great I am. He died up on that cross. He didn't have to, but he did. Somebody hear it this morning. You heard the songs that ministered to him. He found some worth in each and every one of us. He died for us. He changed us in the inside. See, we always have to turn to Psalm 51 and 10 and see what David said. When he said, create in me a clean heart and renew in me a right spirit. We can say that now, right? See, on his Jesus journey. See, scriptures is more than reading when you can feel the scriptures that's speaking back to you. See, you can flip your pages to Romans 8 and 28 through the journey now, and it will tell you all things work together for the good. For those that love God, that are called according to his purpose. Those people, some they have turned away, done took a pair of Jonah's shoes. But I'm here to tell you, the Psalms even tells you this. I believe it's Psalm 139, 7 and 8. It said, where would I go from your spirit? Where could I flee from your presence? If I sin into heaven, you are there. If I lay my bed in hell, you are there. Where can we go that he's not there? There's nothing hidden. What's in the dark will come to the light. We are called to worship him. He didn't have to do what he did, but he did. Found guilty, born in a world of iniquity, in a sin environment. Oh, we're all sinners at one time. Yeah. He didn't have to breathe in the man's nostril to begin with. The psalmist go on and talking about when you done been through something, it's all in the soul, in the depth of you. That's why the scriptures say we don't even know what to pray for. Not unless the Spirit of the Lord utter it to us, right? See, when you've been through something, when you empty yourself, see, God is in the deep part of you. See, them lonely days, them struggles or whatever, and you find yourself crying out before the Lord. I'm talking about from the heart. Psalms 68 and 1, I believe, would say this. Let God arise and let your enemies be scattered. I will bless the Lord at all times, good times and in bad times. But when you're with God, it's no bad times. He's just trying to speak to you. See, maybe you didn't have a prayer life and you tried to do all them things by yourself. He said, now since you done went as far as you can go, I want you to call out to me now. He didn't have to do it, but he did. See, sometimes we might have problems waiting on the Lord. See, that's why I love the Lord and his word. Because it tells us those that can't wait. The Bible said those that wait on the Lord, right? He'll renew your strength. Didn't he say that? we can kind of mount up just like on wings of eagles. Run and don't get weary. I have any weary people in the house now? Maybe your problem is you don't wait on him. It said you could even walk this. And it said you won't even faint. See, the Lord have a way of speaking to us. See, when a man can look in his own heart, he can come quickly to repentance. You know what repentance does? Empty you. Now God can come in. Why else would he say, greater is the one that's in you than he's in the world? Somebody got to move, right? In order to fight this battle, this struggle, what we're dealing with, you got to move out the way. The book of Acts is a real scripture. 17 and 28, it says in him we live, move, and have our beings. How can you be at two places at the same time? Somebody got to move. Luke would tell you in 9 and 23, if you have a desire to follow me, first you have to what? Deny your who? Your neighbor? Yourself. And pick up your cross, what? How many skip a day or what? So it's letting you know that a cross is a hard thing to bear, but be of good cheer. In this old world, you will have trials and tribulations. God's word. Didn't have to place his word in us. Didn't have to give a comforter. He didn't have to do it. But he did. God is just good. And just in case the devil trying to pop his head up, first of all, Pastor, I know you're looking at me and I know you hear me. I want to thank Pastor Greer for giving me the opportunity to speak behind his pulpit. And I know when a man finds a wife, he finds a good thing. So for those that say he didn't even acknowledge him, thank God for your Holy Spirit for guiding me in the name of Jesus. Because one thing I know about the adversary, when God's word is spoken, they're going to do one thing or the other. It's going to submit to his will, or it's going to resist God's word. And they'll become to be an accuser of the brethren, which God hates. It's in Proverbs. He say he hate those things. There ain't too many things God say he hate, but that's one of them. Causing discord among the brethren. Woe to them things. The Lord himself was tempted. But for every temptation, God will give you a route of escape, won't he? And you'll be able to bear it. If it weren't for God's word in us, where would we be? Think about it. He didn't even have to do it. But he did. And he said, I will bless the Lord at all times. That's why I bless him at all times. His praises will continually be in my mouth. It's a dark place when you don't have nowhere to turn. Friends will leave you. People will go out and buy a call ID. Will screen your calls. But I can call him in the midnight hour, realizing he's everywhere at the same time. He could hear my cry. Something happened in my life. I sought the Lord. See, others at a point didn't want to hear me. But I love him because he heard my cry. He He changed me in the inside. See, some people are still looking for Reggie. He ain't there no more. He left. He gone. The reason I said it, because people are trying to hold people hostage from what they done did in the past. All it is to me is a testimony. I remember, shoot, if you remember, that means I done changed. Hello. Didn't have to do it, but he did. Yeah. See, the good thing about God, he said, come on, let's magnify the Lord together. We all got a story, right? Everybody in the house got a testimony? Before the testimony, it was a test, right? I got one here. But that testimony could help how many? See it bear good fruit. Yeah, see if you got good fruit, yeah. If you plant a good seed. See, that's what testimonies are. See, that's why we have to go through the door. See, Jesus is that door. Right? I think it's somewhere they say he had made us to be created in his image. When you're going through the door, you can rejoice and count it all joy. Because his word is true, right? See, when friends leave you, did they leave him? Oh, you can go and step on and say, I'm beginning to be more like you now. When people lie on you and betray you, oh, shoot. Hallelujah, Lord. People be trying to nail you to the cross. But you know what? He got up. He got up because what? We can get up, right? Shh. It's a time of celebrating. Can neither one of us cure sickness. But Isaiah will lay it out for you. He'll say, hey, I'm going to turn you somewhere. I'm going to turn you over here to 53-5 somewhere. And I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to say this. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquity. And the chastisement of our peace is what? Upon him. And with his stripes, we are healed. Have I got anybody that the doctor diagnosed you? And you're still here today, right? I got any cancer survivors here? Have anybody ever got to the edge like you was going to lose your mind? Somewhere it tells me he's a wonderful counselor. We'll pay the counselor $300-400 an hour. But see, if you don't know what the word is saying, you will go somewhere, spend all that hard-earned money, and the word to speak to you. See, it reminds me of this little girl. You know, she was at home, and she saw this book up on the mantle that's been there a long, long time. And she asked her mother, he said, what is that book? And she told her, said, oh, that's God's book. She thought about it for a little while. And she thought about it. He said, well, since nobody's reading around here, we should give it back. It doesn't do you any good to set the book on the mantle. Open the book and put your hands on it. The word. Why else would the Lord say, speak to your mountains? Because if you're in the flesh, the devil going to speak back to you. Before you know it, you're in prison. Oh, it got quiet. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you could put hard coals on their head. See, it's about restoring, right? Am I right? Oh, that old girl and that boy ain't gonna never do it again. Oh, I'm kicking them out. I done told them, who raised you? I ain't gonna never have nothing to do with you. Suppose Jesus told you that. None of us here was hard-headed, right? I know we read God's book like a fable, so it was the Israelites, it's not us. See, God's book is not a fable, it's for every one of us. Romans 2:11. The Bible will tell us in Romans 2:11, God is not a respecter of person. So if somebody got a car, this wife or whatever, you don't have to gaze up on them. If you want a car, it's there for you too. If you want salvation, it's there for you too. If you want to sing in the choir, you can do that. You want to be on the usher, you can do all of this. Because somewhere it tells me you can do all things. Which do what? But you got to go through them, right? Don't miss going through it. See, when you don't go through them, I couldn't sing that song. I don't know what they preaching about today. I seen them over here. They wasn't even acting like that, you know. They just putting on a face in church, but they somewhere else acting up. They ain't told the person. But the Bible says if you have all with your brother, first go to your brother. I know we're on our way to heaven. I know that's why we don't read the word. We don't want to change, but you don't get away. If I don't see it, I don't have to do it. All right? Because every time you breathe, you know God's presence is here. Because he's saying he breathed into man natural. Why else would he say, if everything held breath, let him what? Hold your breath. Don't say anything and watch you die. That's why it's something about giving God praises. Giving him thanks. Because if you don't, you will die. And ain't nowhere in the world that you saying every time you turn around, the Lord keep on blessing me. I done heard the song in here several times. So I just keep on turning. I keep on turning. I keep on turning. And then sit down like this here. Stand up on your feet. Salmon said, put your hands together. Look over your own life. Why does somebody have to pump you to do that? Think how good God is. Holy saints. We got some pretty nice looking cooking pans at home. That look very good on the outside. But if you burn something, it still look good on the outside, right? But there's something bad in the inside. Maybe that's the reason we can't praise him and give him thanks. Looking good on the outside, not realizing there's something bad in the inside. Y'all ain't talking with me. I know you know it. I know y'all scholars. And I ain't caring nothing about the devil because in James 4:7, it says, submit unto God and resist the devil. What he say you do? You flee. Well, I think everybody here say to God, ain't nobody around. Ushers, hold them in. But in the name of Jesus, God is good. He's worthy of the praise. I just wanted to take you back to memory lane. That's all I wanted to do. To wake you up from this spiritual coma. Everything in your life that's not of God ain't nothing but a distraction. It ain't Trump, it's you. That's a distraction. Trump ain't coming to visit you in the wee hours of the night. The Lord's your focus. He's the source. He had what? All power. God is good. I'm going to take my seed in a minute because I know he didn't have to do it. Because it tells me this. Friday night, Friday morning, he died. All day Friday night, he died. Saturday morning, he died. Saturday night, he died. But early Sunday morning, he got up with all power in his hand. God is good. God is good all the time. He didn't have to do it, but he did. He didn't have to do it, but he did. He's worthy of the highest praise. My soul cries out, hallelujah, hallelujah. He's worthy. I heard my cry. I was in need in him, but I sought the Lord, and he heard me. He changed me from the inside out. I thank him. I give him praise. I'm here to lift him up. God is just good. I give him praise. I thank him for another day. I thank him for all things. I thank him for the enemies. I thank him for all things. He tells me to count it all joy. I'm just trying to do his will. I'm just trying to do what's right. God is good. I realize that he didn't have to do it, but he did. I thank him for that. He's good all the time. He's worthy. I can't stop. I'm losing my mind. God is good. God is good all the time. I thank him. I give him praise. The great I am. The morning star. The wonderful master. I thank him. I give him praise. You don't know my story. You don't know it. You don't know it. You don't know it. You don't know what I done been through. I thank him. I give him praise. I'm going to lift him up. He's good. Oh, bless his name. Oh, I'm going to leave you alone. I got to go. I don't know where I'm going, but I'm going. I'm going over yonder. One day, I'm going to see him one day. I'm going to hear those words. Good and faithful servant. Job well done. My name will be written in the Lamb's Book of Life. One day, if I finish the race, if I keep the faith, if I stay the course, one day, there's a crown of righteousness laid before me. I'm waiting on that day. One day, but until then, I'm going to speak his word. I'm going to do his will. I'm going to look for his guidance. It's not all that way. Acknowledge me. Lean not into your own understanding. He will direct your path. In the name of Jesus. I'm about to leave y'all alone. I got to go. He didn't have to do it, but he did. I got to take my seat. I got to go. God's just good. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Come on and magnify with the Lord with me. Hallelujah. Let us exalt his holy name. Stand up on your feet. Thank God. Thank him. Give him praise. Lift him up. He's worthy. 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 Praise God. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's give the Lord a shout out. The doors of the church is open. He didn't even have to give you an invitation, but he did. He said those that might not know him in the pardon of their sins. He said if thou would confess